us, Toldos. We're going to have a look at the issue, the thorny issue. It's come up probably many times in the past of the deceit that goes on. Basically, we've got all our holy forefathers and foremothers, whatever, matriarchs and patriarchs, and we've got basically a lot of deceit going on in the parsha. Actually, more than perhaps I thought of before. We'll read it and then we'll talk about it. So, Iris, over to you.
Right. Isaac and Rebekah endure 20 childless years until their prayers are answered and Rebekah conceives. She experiences a difficult pregnancy as the children struggle inside her. God tells her that there are 2 nations in your womb and that the younger will prevail over the elder. Esau emerges first. Jacob is born clutching Esau's heel. Esau grows up to be a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Jacob is a wholesome man, a dweller in the tents of learning. Isaac favors Esau. Rebekah loves Jacob. Returning exhausted and hungry from the hunt one day, Esau sells his birthright, his rights as the firstborn, to Jacob for a pot of red lentil stew. In Gerar, in the land of the Philistines, Isaac presents Rebekah as his sister out of fear that he will be killed by someone coveting her beauty. He farms the land, reopens the wells dug by his father Abraham, and digs a series of his own wells. Over the first, there is strife with the Philistines, but the waters of the third well are enjoyed in tranquility. Oh, sorry, over the first 2, there is strife with the Philistines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1 second. More. Okay.
Oh. Esau marries 2 Hittite women. Isaac grows old and blind and expresses his desire to bless Esau before he dies. While Esau goes off to hunt for his father's favorite food, Rebekah dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, excuse me, covers his arms and neck with goat skins to simulate the feel of his hairier brother, prepares a similar dish, and sends Jacob to his father. Jacob receives his father's blessings for the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land, and mastery over his brother. When Esau returns and the deception is revealed, all Isaac can do for his weeping son is to predict that he will live by his sword, and that when Jacob falters, the younger brother will forfeit his supremacy over the elder. Jacob leaves home for Haran to flee Esau's wrath and to find a wife in the family of his mother's brother Laban. Esau marries a 3rd wife, Mahalat, the daughter of Ishmael.
Right, thank you. He marries his cousin, though, right? So, okay, so, question. What are some examples of deceit that take place in this week's Edda?
Well, obviously Rebekah dressing Jacob up to pretend to be Esau.
Yes, there's also
Isaac pretending that she was his sister again, was what Abraham did.
Yeah, we've got that again.
Yep,
we discussed this Shabbos afternoon a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't come up with a complete answer as to why that didn't show a lack of trust in God, that they felt they had to actually lie. Okay, and of course, something I never paid attention to, but we'll look at shortly, is what exactly is the nature of Yaakov's deception? The nature is that basically the Yitzchak ends up being presented with quote unquote, I say quote unquote, because ultimately they say, oh, it was all part of God's plan, but on the surface at least, the wrong boy, the wrong son, yes? What happens when Jacob goes to get married? What does he get presented with in his eyes?
The
wrong daughter. So do you see a parallel there? Anyone ever heard of the concept of midah keneged midah? We talk about it a lot. That basically you what goes around comes around. And quite often the person is punished through karma, whatever, through hashgacha pratis, through divine providence, in the very way that they inflicted on someone else. So I never even thought about this before. But it's interesting that Yaakov is part of a plot to deceive his father as to which son should get the blessing, and he gets deceived as to which wife he should marry. So there's a certain poetic justice there. Anyway, we're going to look at this whole issue of the deceit, because let me ask you a question. Last week we said Yitzhak was 37, and yet he listened to what his dad told him to. Here we have Yaakov, he listens to his mum. So who's the instigator, him or Rivka?
Rivka.
Who bears responsibility?
Rivka.
I would have thought equal.
Probably equal. Though it's what we would call what do they call it nowadays? I can't think what they call it. Like if I think a teacher had a relationship with a student or something, I can't think. A lack, imbalance of power, because she's his mother ultimately. So you can't say, oh, well, they're in it together. He's obviously going to listen to his mother. We already know that he was more of a mummy's boy and Esav was a daddy's boy. But anyway, okay.
Was there also a certain
Just saying,
amount?
sorry, 1 second. So who bears responsibility? What did I just say? Who bears responsibility? Yes, who bears responsibility? Yes, yeah.
Or Jacob.
Lost my train of thought there while I was asking. Sorry, what were you saying, Iris?
Wasn't there a certain amount of deceit from Esau? When he came back and found that
Yes.
Isaac had blessed Jacob instead, he starts weeping because he's lost the blessing of the firstborn, but he'd already sowed the blessing anyway.
Right.
Why
so
was
that's
he weeping about it?
Good question. Good question.
Although arguably that was a very unequal transaction involving an element of deceit anyway.
Right. Well, how hungry was he? Let's see. We're going to come to that in a moment. I know what I was going to say. So let me ask you at the end, whether Yaakov believes he was righteous or justified or not. By the end of the Parsha, not the end of the Parsha, later on, of course, he goes out to meet Esav and he comes in peace. So clearly he recognizes that he's caused hurt and pain. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Right. Let's see. I'm also thinking that we now understand marriage as a unit and, two halves are a whole, and, people only marry one wife. I always wondered about that, and people have multiple wives. How did all those beautiful droshes under the chuppah about your soulmate work? Congratulations on finding your 20th soulmate. Would have been a very different vibe. So I don't know what people's relationships were like in those days. I imagine that they were slightly less, I don't want to say less communicative than today, because we have no idea, but I would imagine that they probably had more traditional roles. And it's quite possible that, in today's day and age, a couple can be texting all day, even while they're in different countries. Whereas, it's quite possible that, the men were out hunting and the women were home. And I don't know how much interaction there was. I don't know how much the men were involved in what went on in the home with the kids. So I don't know what the dynamics of the family relationship would have been, that Rivka's home with Yaakov telling him what to do while, Esav's out and whatever. So I don't know. But now it's hard to conceive of, how could you deceive your spouse like that? What does that say about your marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to say God told her to, we've been down that route before. You can't blame him for things. Was Yaakov right to deceive his father? Was he right to take the blessing? Was Rivka right in coming up with the plan? It's a very important question. So let's have a look at some of this. It could be, by the way, that they're all right. That she was right because it was the only way to make sure the bracha went to the right person. But Esav was also right to be annoyed, and Yitzchak was right ultimately to give Esav the blessing he gave him, and it all worked out in the end. Let's see. How did she know that Yaakov was going to have the? Let's assume for a moment she wasn't just being petty and she liked Yaakov better and she wanted him to. I don't even know exactly what the birthright was. I presume it was the inheritance, and any sort of family roles would pass to the firstborn, basically the double portion and so on. I'm assuming that's what the birthright was. We're not actually told what and all the blessings that would go to the firstborn. Sorry?
In the Chumash, Chumash, it said that part of the blessing of the firstborn would have been to be the spiritual leader of the clan.
Yes, correct.
Tribe. So Esau was showing that he didn't care about spiritual matters by giving up his his birthright,
Right,
which would have included being
right.
the
I think
spiritual leader.
people variously feel that he was either just a wicked guy or he was misunderstood because he wasn't really given a chance. But yes, you have to be the right person. We all know what happens when you have a king and the firstborn child, or whatever, is not suitable for the role, but they get it by virtue of their accident of birth type of thing. It doesn't work well. We also know, of course, that it's not always the oldest. Aaron was not the oldest, and yet he became the high priest, right? So, let's see.
Aaron,
Okay, how did
Did
Rivka
you
know?
just say, Rabbi, did you just say that Aaron was not the oldest?
Sorry, come again. Sorry, I just got completely wrong way around. Moshe wasn't the oldest, and yet he became the leader. So I said that the wrong way around.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, right? Yeah. So yes, sorry. So Aaron, yes, Aaron was the Kohen Gadol, but Moshe was the leader, and Aaron was the older one. So he didn't. We said before he didn't take that to heart. He didn't take that personally. Now let's see where Rivka knew that Yaakov's going to be the one. So right at the beginning of the Seder, who would like to read this? We just read this morning in the first Aliyah.
I'll read it if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two
This
nations.
is God's words to her. Yeah.
Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger.
So God himself had already told her this, that the older will serve the younger. So she's already got that in the back of her mind, or even the front of her mind. Secondly, as somebody just said, I think Julian mentioned, right, what happens? I don't know, by the way, if Asaph was really dying of hunger, and you can go without food for 24 hours. I think it's a little bit exaggerated to say. If you say he was dying of hunger, then he had no choice but to sell his birthright. But the whole thing's a bit contrived on all sides, right? It's a bit of an unfair thing of Yaakov to ask, to con him and trick him while he's while he's weak. But by the same token, was he really so weak that he had to? The suggestion is that Rivka knew from here that he didn't have much respect for his birthright. Let's read it.
Rabbi, I'm thinking that the birthright is not one thing. It's lots of different things.
Yeah, it's the privileges that go with being the oldest. Yeah.
Another.
Yeah, it's the privileges.
Yeah.
So this is also from this morning's reading. So it's interesting. It says, "Yaakov noson le'esav lechem u'nezid alashim." Yaakov gave Esav bread and lentil stew, right? Vayachal vayesh, and he ate and he drank. And we know the background to this was that Esav said, "I'm starving." Yaakov said, "Sell me the birthright." And Esav said, "Fine, I'm going to die of hunger. It's no use to me." Maybe he was a bit of a drama queen. What does this verse say? It says, "Vayakam vayelach," and Esav arose and went on his way. Vayivez Esav es habachira. I've put it in bold there. Thus did Esav spurn the birthright. Now, what does that mean? Vayivez is from the word bizayon. A bizayon is something embarrassing or shameful. It's a bizayon. It's a shameful thing. I think it's used in modern Hebrew as well. Mevazeh is to embarrass or humiliate someone. So Esav basically spurned, he shamed, he cheapened the birthright. That's what the Torah says. So the way that that's often understood is not that Esav, why did he have to say that? Could he just said he sold his birthright? So the implication is he already wasn't particularly bothered by his birthright, as Iris just said about spiritual leadership, right? He didn't care about his birthright. He already showed contempt for his birthright. So there's a suggestion that we see that from here. He was a hunter. He was impetuous. He sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. He ate, drank, rose, and left, and he despised his birthright, basically. So how could he be the guardian of the covenant? To suggest that he only sold his birthright under duress from Yaakov. Well, the Torah uses this word, by Yivez Esav es habachira, that he shamed and despised it. Otherwise, the Torah should have just said he gave his birthright to Yaakov under duress. The implication is he wasn't that bothered about it to start with. And that's why he was able to do it. Now, what other proof do we have of his unsuitability? So if you want to say, why did Rivka pick on Esav, as it were? Why did she contrive his situation? Number one, she already knew the younger one will serve the older the older one will serve the younger. Number two, Esav seemed to have contempt for his, right? It's like, the wicked son who says, "What's all this to you?" He's like, what do I need my birthright for? Who cares? I don't want to be the oldest, right? And number 3, what happens when he takes a wife, right? This is also, I think this week's Sedra, isn't it? Yeah, this week's Sedra. Who would like to read?
Right. When Esau was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith, daughter of Beeri and the Hittite, and Basmath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah.
Right. So basically they weren't happy about his choice of wives. Right. They were from if you recall, Avram sends Eliezer to find a woman who was from good stock, and basically Esau went and sort of married, like I don't know exactly what the Chittim were, but they were one of the 7 nations, right? And he basically did it to spite his parents. It's interesting. Elon is a name you come across in modern Hebrew. Judith, of course, is a popular Judy Yehudit. It's a popular name, and yet you don't come across anyone called Bosmat, to the best of my knowledge, or Be'eri. And according to this, if Judith was Esau's naughty wife from the 7 nations, why do we use the name? But anyway, it's an interesting thought.
Last time we had this.
Right? So he didn't choose a suitable marriage partner becoming a child of Abram. He didn't, Abram and Isaac. He didn't choose.
Actually, the Judith, isn't that one of the women who killed somebody?
Correct. Yes, in the times of Hanukkah. She was a priest, not a priestess. Yes. What do you call it? Yes.
Holofernes.
Yeah.
Yes. But the question is who, so she was probably named after this Judith. So the question is when the name became accepted, if it was Esau's wife, that they were generally frowned upon. It's interesting. Esau really is banished, and he's Seir, and he's Edom, and he's, Rome came from him. YISHMAEL gets, even though Esau gets blessings, we'll see, Ishmael does get blessings, and it says Abram sent him away and said, don't worry, you'll also be a great nation. And of course, we know that they're possibly the most numerous nation currently, possibly. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of Muslims in the world, and they come from Ishmael. So, so Rivka says to herself, the brachas have to go to Yaakov. Esav is indifferent. Imagine that she had an art collection, and Esav said, I'm the firstborn, I want the art collection. She says, but you're a Philistine, you hate art. You don't even like art. He says, that's not the point. I should get it because I'm the oldest. And you say, that's silly. It's not going to mean anything to you.
The money you got from it would.
And women have what we're told in the Torah, about the Torah in Kabbalah, that women have what's called Bina Yesera, which is basically deeper understanding of things. They have a sixth sense. They're much more perceptive than men. They have perception. So, it would make sense that Rivka had a perception, that depth of perception that Yitzhak may not have had. We're also told he was blind, by the way, right? And we're told the reason he went blind is so he didn't see all Esau's naughty tricks. So could be that blind is a metaphor as well, that he was blind to their true nature. It's interesting, by the way, because in Kabbalistic terms, I think we've come across this before, Avram is always the epitome of chesed. He's always giving to others. He's kind and giving. And Yitzchak is the epitome of gevura, of discipline and being strict. So actually, it doesn't fit with his kind of nature that he would be easily deceived by his children. But anyway, he's old. Maybe he never saw the true nature of the children. The obvious question is, he's old already. What's the point of her trying to do it now? So maybe that's why she said, I have to take matters into my own hands. He never listens to me. He just doesn't listen to me. He keeps on, each time he gives Esav a chance and he blows it. And enough is enough. We have to get Yaakov in the front lines. And I'm going to have to basically take action. Right? And as Iris alluded to, this is not just about family relationships and favorites. It's about the future of the Jewish people. Who's going to be, the patriarch that carries on the blessings of Avraham. And if Rivka's right, it's a small price to pay a bit of family broigas for making sure that, the future is bright. So remember that she was very carefully chosen to be Yitzhak's wife. Why? Because she was kind, right? She gave to the stranger. She's not some horrible witch. She's a person who's the embodiment of loving kindness. So we can assume that if she would do this, she must have felt it was the lesser of various evils and it was something that had to be done. That's how many commentators read it. By the way, others are more critical. Interestingly, right, we read the Akeda last week, 2 weeks ago. Anyone was paying attention. One thing we discussed we're not now because the clock's going back. We have a look at the Parsha Shabbos afternoon a bit as well. One of the things that we discussed is the fact that the Akeda is almost devoid of any emotion in it. We're not told what they were thinking or what they were feeling, you know. And the angel said to Avram, "Stay your hand, for I've now seen that you have faith in the one God. Do not harm your son." And the Torah could say, and Avram said to himself, "Oh, thank God for that." There's nothing, there's no record of it. Quite often, we're not told about emotions. We're told about things like love and hate and anger. We're not told about feelings. We're not told that someone was crying or they were pained. We are occasionally, people trying to have children, they cry and stuff like that. We find a curious thing in this week's Sedra. This is what happened after the whole incident. Who would like to read?
Shall I go?
Yep. This is after Yaakov's had the bracha and Esau comes home.
Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, Bemirma, and took your blessing." And Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?"
Right, this is BBC style reporting. We're not told in other places where people trembled violently or they burst out with a bitter cry. We're told things in quite a matter-of-fact manner. Here you have an incident which seemingly Esau's the bad guy. He was the one that deserved to lose the birthright. And yet there's a tremendous empathy here. And just to highlight those words, Isaac trembled violently. Esau gave a loud and bitter cry. These are very emotional, emotive, dramatic terms. I put it to you that it's very hard to read that paragraph and not feel sorry for both Yitzhak and Esau. Yitzhak, because he's got no clue what's going on. He's been deceived by his, partner in life partner and his younger son, and Esau because he's missed out because of the deceit. It's very empathetic. Right?
What was the blessing that Isaac was going to give to Jacob if Esau got the first blessing?
Good question. I'm not sure we're ever told that. It's a really good question. It wouldn't have made sense for it to do the bracha he did give Esau, because the bracha he did give Esau was a very material one in the end. Now, someone said earlier, Esau didn't appreciate the birthright. That may well be true, but jealousy is a funny thing, isn't it? Envy. We'll see that comes in. You say a child might say, "I don't want it, but I don't see why anyone else should have it."
Yeah.
Sorry?
What does he
That's
mean?
called being a dog in the manger.
Yeah. The father says to the older son, I noticed that you want to go to yeshiva and study to become a rabbi. So, I'm not expecting you to take over the family business. Your younger brother will take over family business. The older son says, "It's my right to take over family business." The father says, "But you never want to. You always said you wanted to sit and learn in Kollel for the rest of your life." He says, "I don't want him to have it." It suddenly becomes about, politics, essentially. Sorry, Julian, what were you going to say?
No, I just wondered, what does it mean when Esau says, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob?"
Right. What's his name? Yaakov.
Jacob the planter, doesn't it? Supplanter.
Yeah, but it also means, let me just get my chumash. The original name is, if you recall, that he grabbed onto Esau's ankle, right?
Yeah.
What's the story? He pushed his way out, and Akev is an ankle, so is a heel. So it's basically an allusion to his coming, hot on the heels and trying to basically supplant him effectively. So I'm just trying to think where we're trying to look up isn't it in the beginning of this week's Sedra? I haven't got my chumash handy. 1 second. It's right in the beginning of this week's Sedra. It says, yes, 1 second. Sorry, let me just get the parsha. Got it in the back of the Sedra. Just give me a moment. Let's see. Yeah, Vayetei Harishon Admoni. The first one came out. 1 second. Vaikushimo Esav. V'acharichein Yotzachiv, and then his brother came. V'yado Ochez Vakev Esav. Yeah, he was holding Esav's heel, hot on the heels. So he came out second, but he was trying to it was like he was trying to push his way through. Vaikushimo Yaakov. It was called Yaakov, which I believe is related to the word Akev, a heel, trying to grab onto his heel. Right? So Esav says this is his name. His name is that he's always trying to basically take me down. He's always trying to push me down. He's always trying to grab onto my heels and my coattails and whatever. He did it. Not only did he take my birthright by stealth with the lentil incident, the lentil stew, but now he's actually come to you and got the bracha. Now the truth is, it's the same thing. Right? The bracha goes with the birthright. Esav says he's cheated me twice, and in fact, Isaac says to him, "Your brother came deceitfully." Now, did Yitzhak not know that this would cause a big rift between the brothers? Wasn't the best thing to do necessarily. But I would say this is very emotive writing. This is very what do you call it? Empathetic. It's like when the BBC report on the classic one, which I heard years ago. I think it was Orla Guerin, but it may not have been. It was somebody. It was Radio 4. It was like the 5 o'clock news or something, 6 o'clock news. And it was like, more Palestinian mothers lost their children today. That's how they report on the fact that some Palestinians were killed by Israelis. Now, they never report that way about Israelis and parents and, bereavement and so on. It's all about, fake news and spin. So the Torah often doesn't tell us people's emotions. But here, where seemingly our empathy should be with Yaakov and Rivka, and yet the Torah causes us to empathize with Yitzhak and Esav. Yitzhak. Sorry. Yeah, Yitzhak and Esav. Yes. So it's curious.
I've always wondered how Isaac could have been deceived so easily by some goat skins stuck on the back of Jacob's hands and neck.
Yeah, I was wondering that as well.
Surely Isaac could have felt the difference. I mean, blind people are meant to have acquire greater sensitivity in their hands to feel different things. But surely you could feel the difference between a goat skin and a hairy person.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Let me take it one step further. What does he say, Yitzchak, when Yaakov comes to him? He says this famous phrase, Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, because he comes. He doesn't even do a very good job. If you want to impersonate someone, you have to copy their mannerisms as well, not just their clothing. Right? If you want to do a good impression of somebody, you can't just dress up in their clothing. You have to copy their mannerisms. Right? Here's a guy. He's not copying his mannerisms. On the contrary, he speaks like Jacob. And Yitzhak says, Hakol kol Yaakov, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are Esav's hands. So your question is, the voice is Jacob's voice, the hands are Esav's, but they're not really. He's a bit hairy. So shouldn't the correct reaction be, you seem like Yaakov, my son, but you've got very hairy suddenly. What have you done? So I suppose the only thing we can say is that a large degree of that is that the story had to happen in this way in order for the unfolding of history. It's all Beshet and it's all Hashgacha Pratis, and it's all part of the big plan. There's plenty of flaws, if you like. But this is a very emotional scene, right? Isaac trembled violently. Avram didn't tremble violently when he lifted his hand to shecht his son. We're not told how he felt. And yet here, we're not told that Rivka, it doesn't say Rivka was in terrible pain at the thought that her younger son would be deprived of the opportunity to serve faithfully his people, and so she contrived a plan. And yet here we're told about their emotions, which causes us to empathize with them. How can you read that passage and not, I don't say brings tears to your eyes, but you feel for Esau. Poor guy, he's been deceived. Two wrongs don't make a right. He may be a bit rough around the edges, but it doesn't make him someone who deserves to be lied to and deceived. So here we're given a lot of emotion in the Torah. And one of the consequences of this, does it turn out well in the short term? No.
So Jacob has to
Yaakov
flee.
basically is forced into exile for more than 20 years. Right? And then Lavan does the same thing to him with the wrong daughter. Right, let's have a look, because it really is, it really is karma, this, if you can say that, tit for tat. Let's have a look. Oh no, we did that, sorry. Right, next one. Right? Who wants to read this?
Shall I read it?
Please.
When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me?" Laban said, "It is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older."
Right. We're not given any context. We're not given any what do you call it? What's it called? The timbre. I can't think of the word. We don't know. I can't think of the word, but we don't know how this is said. But imagine, I always just read it as Lavan says, "Sorry, but this is our custom." Here's another way of reading it. Lavan's not the nicest person either. Imagine this. Lavan says to Yaakov, "You're asking me why I gave you the older daughter instead of the younger daughter? Well, some of us don't put the younger one before the older one. Ha!" Right? It's almost sarcastic. So there's a suggestion. He's basically what we call Yiddish steching him. He's saying, "You deserve it, mate. Sorry, we're not all like you. I put the oldest first. Just because you deceived your brother, I'm not going to do the same thing to my daughters." And by the way, I don't know if anyone's ever come across. I don't know if it's only in very frum circles. There is definitely a practice that I don't know if it's true for. I think it might be true for boys as well. But let's say somebody has an older sister who's not married, and they basically find a shidduch that I think they ask permission of the older sister, basically, or they ask mechila, forgiveness for getting married first. I'm not sure exactly, but to avoid feelings of jealousy and so on. I don't know if it automatically follows that you have to marry off your older daughter first, but we always assumed Lavan was saying this is how we do things around here. But the other way of understanding it would be, we're not all like you, mate. And you could read that in the text as well. In this place, we do things properly, not like you and your family, not like your twisted family. You can imagine. So certainly the consequences were not great. And in fact, this word deceit was used by Yitzchak, right? When Yitzchak's talking to Esav, he says, "Your brother deceived you." He doesn't say, "Oh, well, it's all Bashet because really he deserved the rocha." Yitzchak certainly initially, at least, is not happy about the situation either. Right? By the way, all of this proves the power of a blessing. But even if you didn't deserve it, and even if you gave it to the wrong person, I think I mentioned, was it last week or the week before I spoke in my sermon about this idea that when you daven for someone else, you're rewarded, and how can you abuse it by, I'll sign a contract with you, we'll daven for each other. We said blessings can come even in the most kind of insidious of ways. Right? We know that according to many, Rachel died because Yaakov said, "Whoever stole the statues, let them die," not knowing it was her. Right? And nonetheless, his words came true. The power of words. So you can't undo a bracha. So even though Yitzchak thought he was giving Esav the bracha, and therefore he was deceived, the fact is that you can't put those words back in your mouth. It's a very powerful thing, the power of a blessing, the power of words. So this could be, I find this fascinating, I think this is Rabbi Sachs's innovation, that this could be Lavan basically being sarcastic and saying, you might put the younger before the older, but we don't. We're not all like you. Anyway, basically, it brings grief for the rest of Yaakov's life. Let's say for a moment that him ending up with Leah was basically his karma for what he did to Esav, right? Obviously, in the long term, life worked out okay. He ended up with 12 children who, by the time he got to his deathbed, were all basically, as we would say nowadays, on the derech, on the right path. However, there was plenty of tension between Rachel and Leah. There was tension, of course, between the boys. Yes. When else did Jacob get deceived? Big one.
Oh, well, from Joseph.
Yeah, right. Joseph's coat, the bloodstained coat. More deception. This is a family where people are always deceiving each other. Right. Does anyone know what Yaakov replied when Pharaoh asked him how old he is? Last week, we said Abram was old and he was Baba Yamin. He came into his days, and the Mefarshim say that he enjoyed every day to the fullest. What does Yaakov have to say about his life? Let's have a look. Who would like to read this one? It's a bit of an old-fashioned translation, sorry. Anyone hasn't read yet? Beryl, do you want to read? Are you?
I don't think she's there.
No? Okay, Iris, back to you, I think.
Okay. And Jacob answered Pharaoh, the years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespans of my fathers during their sojourns.
Few and hard, right? Basically, I've had a hard life. How did he have a hard life? Well, he got misled over which woman he was marrying, which led to endless family strife. He thought his son was dead, right? He basically had a lifetime of deceit. And arguably, it all started from the chain of events when he deceives his brother, his father. Question. It says that the younger shall serve the older, right? Sorry, the older shall serve the younger, right?
I don't think he did.
Throughout all of this, is Yaakov in a position of strength?
No.
Hardly, right? He's got strife throughout his life, but he himself alludes to. And yet the Torah says, the older shall serve the younger. The Rav Yavod Sa'ir. So Rabbi Sachs points out, I think this is his Chiddush, that it's actually ambiguous. The Hebrew says V'rav, that means the older, Yavod, can mean either will serve or will be served by Sa'ir, the younger. So Rabbi Sachs renders it that you could actually read it as the older shall serve or be served by the younger. It's ambiguous. And the scenario it gives us is one of constant conflict, not one of clear hierarchy. When God is...
Well, actually, while Jacob was away for those, 20 years or whatever it was, surely Esau was probably lording it over the tribe, thinking that maybe his brother might never come back.
Quite possibly, though it's not clear what kind of leadership he wanted to have, right? Whether he wanted to be a leader, but yes, quite possibly. Now, what's this called, by the way? It's called a riddle. When Miriam and Aaron are speaking about Moshe, God says to them, how can you disrespect my servant Moshe? God says to them, I speak to him face to face. Umareh, I appear to him clearly, below b'chidot, not in riddles, tongue twisters. So chidah apparently is a tongue twister. U'tumunas Hashem yabit, he sees my face. So God says, I don't appear to him in riddles, right? Sometimes the prophet spoke in riddles, right? But, so this is a bit of a riddle. It's ambiguous. Rabbi Avoid Sa'ir, either, the younger will serve the older or be served by the older. So if you say that's ambiguous, you've got a bigger problem. You can't then say to Rivka she was right. It was just stoking the flames of conflict, really. Now, question. Did Yitzhak not understand the nature of his sons? Surely he could have loved Esau and at the same time recognized that Yaakov would be the one to actually bear the covenant. So in fact, he did. What did he do? He prepared, this is the question that was just asked, he prepared 2 sets of brachas. The one for Esau was gifts he felt he would appreciate. The heavens dew, the earth's richness, grain and wine. May nations, we'll come to it in a minute. Oh, well, let's come to it now. What's the bracha he gave Esau? Here, may God give you, this is V'yiten Lecha, it's in Motzei Shabbos. From the dew of the heaven, the fat of the earth, abundance of new grain and wine, may nations bow to you, be master over your brothers. Let your mother's sons bow to you. Cursed be they who curse you, blessed be they who bless you. Not a bad blessing. It's power and it's material things. It's not the blessing of the covenant, right? The blessing to Jacob is basically that you will become, a great, you will continue the great nation, you will inherit the land. So question, does Esau even care about these things? Esau seems much more materialistic. He should be happy with what his father wants to give him.
Actually, that's rather strange, it seems to me. And let your mother's sons bow to you. Her mother was Rachel, Jacob was his mother's son. So in effect, he's saying that Jacob would bow down to Esau and should be master over his brothers.
So we'll come to that in a minute. So if we read it as ambiguous and ongoing conflict rather than a clear hierarchy, then we can ask another question. We're kind of assuming Yitzhak's almost stupid in this, but maybe he's not. Why does she assume when he says, "Come, bless my firstborn Esav, let me bless you before I die," right? Now, the only question is that in the end, he says to Esav, "I'm sorry, your brother tricked you, and this is all I've got left for you." But actually, the brachas he gives to Esav are very fitting onto Esav. Esav is a hunter and a man of the earth who's a materialistic person who craves power. That's what he blesses him with. Grain and wine, the dew and the fat of the earth, and that you will be master over other nations. He blesses him with that. What's the problem? Who's to say he wouldn't have given him that anyway, just given it first? Why do we assume that Yitzhak, without his wife's machinations, wouldn't have known what to do? Maybe he understood his sons. Maybe he loved Esav more for whatever reason. At the same time, recognized Esav wouldn't bear the covenant, but Esav could certainly have gifts. Avram sent YISHMAEL away with gifts. Meanwhile, what's the blessing that he eventually gives to later on to Yaakov? He says, "May Almighty God bless you, make you fertile and numerous, so you become an assembly of peoples. May grant the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring. You may possess the land where you sojourn, which God assigned to Abraham." What did we say the other week? Right? That what were the key things that God promised Abram? That you'll be a great nation and that you'll inherit the land. So, I don't know, does Esav care how many kids he has? Does Esav care about the future generations? Does Esav care about the land? Seems like Esav cares about the here and now. So what's wrong with the bracha he gives him, actually? It's actually fine.
Are you saying then?
Why do you need all this deceit?
Are you saying that he really knew who he was giving the blessings to?
I don't know if he really knew, but I'm saying that the assumption is that if Rivka hadn't intervened, he would have got it wrong. Why do we assume that? Yeah, "Come here, Esav, I need to talk to you." She says, "Oh my gosh, he's going to go give him all the brachos." Why does she think so little of him that she doesn't occur to her that maybe he's calling him first because he's the oldest, but he's going to give him something that's appropriate to him?
Well, why didn't he wait? Why didn't Isaac wait till both the sons were together?
Good question. That would have been a lot less problematic, wouldn't it? There is a school of thought that says, I think Shimon Peres once nearly brought the government down because he called King David an adulterer in the Knesset. There's a school of thought that says that we shouldn't criticize the Avot, and that, you know, that they are obviously extremely righteous people. And just because we don't understand why they did things doesn't mean it was quote unquote wrong. So in the example I just gave, the Gemara discusses at length how David could have actually been with Bathsheba, and to suggest that it really was an extramarital affair would be completely unacceptable for kings. So there has to be some explanation. And there are explanations which are far from satisfactory. One of the classic ones being that the men would write a get before they went to war. The problem is that he sent her husband to war. It definitely wasn't his finest moment. But we don't know. You know, we're talking earlier about plasters and Shabbos. Sometimes you don't know, and sometimes you just have to. There's a principle of court cases that it says a dayan can only judge on what's in front of them, right? You know, so you come to, so it's a classic thing. You know, sometimes people say, please don't. I know that my daughter's been dealing drugs, but please don't jail her because she's got into Oxford, and you'll ruin a promising career. I don't know if anyone remembers, there was a horrible case of a medical student in Oxford actually that murdered somebody. And she argued that because she was giving back to society by being an Oxford medical student, she shouldn't be jailed. It was the most ridiculous thing. You know, at the end of the day, you've got to live with the consequences. Sometimes you have to deal with what's in front of you. The fact that you might be an Oxford medic or not is irrelevant. What's in front of us is you committed a crime, you need to pay the price. Or somebody says, you know, this guy needs, he needs imprisoning because he's a danger and a menace to society. Okay, where's your evidence? No evidence. I just don't like the look of him. Sorry, that won't wash in court. And sometimes a court case will be unfair because a judge can only go on what's presented as the facts. And if you present your evidence wrong, you lose your case. So we have a similar principle in life. You can only judge on the facts in front of you. You know, you try to foresee the future, but you don't always know. You have to deal with the here and now. The here and now was that Rivka felt that we're assuming not for just, you know, selfish ego reasons. She was a very giving person. We know that she was a kind person by nature. She presumably was a motherly person. She can't have been completely stupid. She must have seen what happened with Yitzchak and YISHMAEL. And nonetheless, she goes down this path. She obviously must have felt that this was necessary. Maybe she was right, although it could have happened by another means. That this is what it took for Yaakov to be blessed with the covenant. All I'm saying is, we don't know. We're not told this. And for all we know, Yitzhak wasn't, Yitzhak comes across almost this kind of, dumb character with no intelligence to work anything out. His wife has to manipulate him. Maybe he's not so stupid. I mean, obviously he's not so stupid as he appears. I found it fascinating. I said about the Duke of Edinburgh that, I think I said this in one of my sermons, that, often when he made these terrible faux pas, that sometimes it was contrived to make people feel comfortable. He really wasn't as bigoted as people might have thought. He was definitely from a different generation, but he also said carefully calculated things to basically break the ice with people, and it often worked. So question, if this is all the case, does Yaakov recognize that? And the answer is he does. He does. Because when he finally reunites with Esau, what does he say? Who wants to read this? This is later on next week, I think, 2 weeks.
Please accept my presents, which has been brought to you. For God has favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted.
Right. What's his blessing? His blessing is, we know he had a lot of livestock, right? Which is the blessing that's promised Esau. What else? Anyone else remember what Yaakov does when he meets Esau? He bows down to him 7 times.
Yes, yeah.
So, kachna, if we read the Hebrew, kachna es birchasi, take my, it's not really a present, my brocha, which I have brought to you. In other words, I wronged you. I shouldn't have done it. Please forgive me. I want to return the brochas, at least the material ones. And Esau accepts it. And by the way, what did God say to YISHMAEL? Also, he said to Hagar, right, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, I will make a great nation of him. So Yitzchak's brachas to Esau are only a continuation of what was given to YISHMAEL. There's nothing so terrible. The whole thing, if you take out Rivka's paranoia, if you want to call it that, if that's what it is, the whole thing would have gone just fine. And after all those years, when they finally reunite, Yaakov says to Esau, let me give back to you that which I took from you. The implication being that he recognizes it was wrong. Right? What does God say years earlier for YISHMAEL? I'll just whiz through this quickly. Avram says to God, if only YISHMAEL might live under your blessing. God says, no. Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as a covenant for his descendants after him. As for YISHMAEL, I hear you. I will surely bless him. I'll make him fruitful and greatly increase his numbers. He'll be the father of 12 rulers. I'll make him a great nation. So actually, they both get a bracha. Why can't it be the same with Yaakov and Esau? Esau can have the blessings of the land, the fat of the land, but why can't they both be numerous? It's not even a problem. And by the way, also, what happens to Yitzchak and YISHMAEL later in life?
That they bury his father together.
Right. We raised a question about Judith, right? What do we say every morning? Right? Yes. What does it say? That his Yitzchak and YISHMAEL buried him in the cave of Machpelah. We had this last week in the field of Ephron. So the commentaries say that they reconciled in later life. Right? What do we say every morning? Rabbi YISHMAEL Omer. Who's Rabbi YISHMAEL named after? YISHMAEL. How can you name someone after YISHMAEL? He's a wicked man. No one calls their kid Esau, by the way. The answer is YISHMAEL did teshuvah, right? He became okay. And even great rabbis went, look, Rabbi YISHMAEL might have been named after his great grandfather, but someone was named after YISHMAEL. The name was used, right? He became kosher effectively. They reconciled in later life. So maybe Yitzchak assumed that the same thing could happen with Yaakov and Esau, that they would be okay. So the question is, based on that, is it possible to say that nobody's actually wrong? Yitzchak is right that he wants to bless Esau with, because you say, what's the problem? He ends up blessing Esau with wealth and Yaakov with continuity. What's the problem? The problem is that actually YISHMAEL was also blessed with continuity. So why shouldn't Yitzchak have given Esau that bracha as well of his offspring? But he didn't. So the answer is that really he could have done. He could have blessed Esau. It could well be that he fully knew that Esau wouldn't be worthy of the spiritual leadership, but nonetheless he could bless him, as Avram had taught YISHMAEL. Esau was respectful, at least towards his father. Rivka thought she was doing the right thing to protect the future. Yaakov was listening to his mum, which you should do. So, is there a good and a bad guy here, or is it just unfortunate? And it brings about, we definitely see that if you want to say that Yaakov and Rivka were the shine like a light here, and the others, don't do themselves justice, it's not really true. Because as a result of this, Yaakov throughout his life is plagued, and he says on his deathbed he says to Pharaoh rather, that most of my life has been hard. And most of that hardship has come out of his deceit. So, unfortunately, the answer to this is that things are not always what they seem. The first time you read something, you make certain judgments, but the reality is that things are not black and white. And the important point we see from this is that Yaakov does admit later on that maybe it wasn't such a great idea. Now, often a person will say, maybe it wasn't such a great idea, but you know what, it worked out okay in the end. So probably that's the case here as well. It wasn't such a great idea, led to years and years of strife and estrangement, which could have been avoided. But the final analysis, it worked out okay. But I recognize, he basically says, so I recognize how you feel, and that's why I'm returning the bracha. It's very literal. Take my bracha. Take the bracha back from me. I shouldn't have taken it. Now, when we talk about what he should or shouldn't have taken, I'm not sure we have to define what the birthright is. Is the birthright certain privileges? So in reality, it could have been dealt with very differently. Yitzchak could have given different brachas to Yaakov and Esav, and everyone could have been happy. Why the black and white assumption? I don't know. But the other point is that basically, leaving aside how the brachas came about, be happy with your bracha. Your bracha is your bracha. Yaakov had a certain role to play. That was his bracha. Esav had a certain role to play. It was his bracha. Unfortunately, because of what came about through Rivka and Yaakov, Esav ended up upset. The irony is, if he would have gone first, his father might have given him the same bracha anyway. We assume that Yitzchak didn't know, but if we assume Yitzchak knew, who's to say that the only difference is he would have gone first, which sometimes is a big deal. And from this, we see what we all know, which is the 10th commandment. You shouldn't covet your neighbor's house or wife.
I've just had a thought, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Maybe when Esau sold his birthright for a mess of pottage, maybe he was thinking that, my father's not going to take any notice of that. I'm the eldest. He's still going to treat me as the eldest, whatever I say to Jacob.
I mean, let me ask you a question. Did Yaakov and Esav go to their parents and say, we've just done a deal that from now on Yaakov will be the firstborn? If not, how was Yitzchak supposed to know? Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of unanswered questions in that. But maybe, just maybe, rather than seeing in black and white, the good guys and the bad guys, because even if you set the premise, many things Esav did in his life are not okay, and he married certain women to wind up his parents, but nonetheless, it's not just Esav, it's Esav and Yitzchak in this equation. So they're not the bad guys. There might be some misunderstandings here. And Yaakov, Esav, Rivka's not some wicked witch who's out to embarrass her husband. She's just trying to do the right thing. And throughout history, people had to do manipulative things. What do we say of the women in Egypt? That because the mirrors that they used to beautify themselves so that they'd be desirable to their husbands, the copper from that was made into the basin for washing hands in the Beis Hamikdash because it was such a holy thing. So people often have to manipulate people. It's a fact of life to get what you want. So maybe that's not the issue. Maybe with hindsight it wasn't such a great idea, and it's not so clear that Yaakov got all the brachas anyway. But interestingly, later on in life, he does acknowledge the pain to Esav. I would suggest also maybe he's 20 years older by then. Maybe he's more mature. The one thing that comes out of this is, it never ends well when you are jealous of someone else's blessings in life. Because we each have our own bracha. And that's why it says in the 10 Commandments, it's codified. You shouldn't be envious of somebody. It should say you shouldn't be envious of their blessings because you have your own blessings as well. That's not how we see life. And actually, the ultimate irony is if you look at Esav's bracha, it's a very nice bracha for Esav. His main issue probably is that he didn't get it first. But the actual bracha, nothing wrong with it. When he says, I've got nothing left to give you, he then gives a beautiful bracha about material wealth. And what's the problem? So the problem probably is it's the usual thing. It's the pecking order. It's the pettiness. It's the hierarchy. It's not about the content of the words. It's about what was said to whom and when. Anyway, we said we finish at 11, so that's perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Thank
So
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
have a good week, everyone.
Christine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shabbat. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Bye.
Have a
Bye.
good week.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rabbi Wallen.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi Wallen.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Oh, bye, Beryl.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Beryl.